The beauty we usually talk about is elegance, so it's kind of limited. We have previously discussed this type of artistic vision, which is just based on a feature of our inner perspective. This inner perspective isn't something you can just see at a glance. If you can see it at a glance, it's called an external perspective. When we get pulled into the inner perspective through the external one, that's what makes the artistic vision possible. But this inner perspective has its own traits. The inner perspective that makes beauty possible isn't inherently beautiful in itself. So, when beauty happens, it's really the occurrence of this artistic vision, right? And this vision of beauty can't happen without the imagination of the person experiencing it. But you can't just step into a certain inner perspective that makes beauty possible and imagine something grand or tragic. That's just not possible. For example, here are some traits of the inner perspective, the traits that make beauty possible. These traits aren't something you can see directly, but you can feel them. The inner perspective that makes beauty possible has traits like harmony, tranquility, lightness, elegance, delicacy, and liveliness, which you can feel. When we get pulled into the vibe of a piece of art, we start feeling all peaceful and light, and our imagination kicks in. And once that imagination gets going, it creates this really beautiful picture in our minds. We've got to get clear on these two levels. Tranquility isn't something you can just see right away, it's something you feel. Same goes for that light and lively feeling. When a piece of art brings out this inner vibe, letting us step into it and feel all calm, we're stepping into that inner vibe. And when we feel that harmony, we're right there in that inner vibe. Remember that example I gave last time, light boat, short oars, nice West Lake? Let's take Ouyang Xiu's, 11th century CE, poem Cai Song Zi for example. The pale water meanders. Fragrant reeds line the embankment, and the faint sounds of flute and song follow everywhere. Breezeless, the water's surface is smooth as glass, the boat glides along unnoticed. Slight ripples stir. Startled, the sandpipers take flight and skim along the shore. When we read this poem, we're stepping into this kind of inner vibe. It's not all wild and grand, it's calm, light, harmonious, and lively. This is a classic way a beautiful picture forms in our minds. If we don't try to explain it and let it sink in as a possible inner horizon, let the beauty become the possible inner horizon, we've discussed it before. We've talked about what it's like, and then we ask, what does this beautiful aesthetic imagery itself really mean? It means a certain kind of experience of being alive. It is a type of human existential experience, and the characteristic of this existential experience is the realization of freedom. This realization of freedom is directly affirmed in the material forms of the external world. When I'm feeling the joy of realizing my freedom, I'm looking at the outside world in a whole new light. We can feel the outside world giving a big thumbs up to our existence as human beings. This is the most basic reason why beauty is so darn beautiful. If people don't feel free and don't get what freedom is all about, they won't be able to see the beauty in things. And if someone's always negative about life and people, they're not going to find beauty. That's the basic idea behind what beauty means. The world's got its flaws, but deep down, we humans understand freedom and we bring that understanding into the things we sense. Then those things become beautiful images. But let's talk more about beauty. Some fancy theories say beauty is when all the problems just disappear. That's a pretty shallow way to look at beauty, like there are no problems at all, but that's not true. So where does the best beauty come from? It comes from seeing the big flaws in the world, but still believing in and longing for the good in people. Only folks like that can create beauty that really means something, even if it's got some pain mixed in. Some art pieces create beautiful images, but why aren't they all that great? It's because they're like too much of a good thing, like a cake that's just too sweet. I saw this TV show ages ago, about the life of Johann Strauss, the famous composer known as the King of Waltz in Austria. When he was starting out, the tunes in his early music were really beautiful. But here's the thing, he wasn't so sure of himself. One time, he went to a priest in a church for advice. This priest knew a lot about music and really appreciated good tunes. Johann Strauss showed him his music, and after checking it out, the priest said, "It's too beautiful. It's like eating too much rich cake, it makes me sick. You cannot write music like this." This got Johann Strauss feeling down, and he couldn't agree with the priest, so he stopped asking him for advice. The TV show looks at this in a positive way, saying it was a good thing that Johann Strauss didn't listen to the priest, which helped him achieve great things in music. The show warns against taking advice from religious folks. But as a viewer, I think the priest was spot on. Why do we make music? In his Christian terms, it's to hear God, to hear something beyond. When we talk about the highest level of beauty, what does it have to include? Pain. So, this deep beauty has a lot of meaning. I want to recommend a piece to everyone. It's Mozart's Flute and Harp Concerto in C major from his middle period. If you can find this recording, especially the second part, you'll experience a beautiful vibe, but you'll also realize that this beauty isn't all smooth sailing. No way. If you really think about it, you'll find that it has some pain, although it's subtle. We might use certain words to describe it, like melancholic beauty. These descriptions might not mean much, you have to listen for yourself. When I listen to this part, it reminds me of a poem by the poet Qin Guan, 11th century CE. The theme of the second part of Mozart's Flute and Harp Concerto in C major brings to mind a line from Qin Guan's poem, "Free-floating blossoms, light as a dream, endless drizzle fine as silk, delicate as sorrow. The fancy curtain hangs idle from small silver hooks." This isn't just a surface-level beauty, it has a deep sense of sadness and a bit of pain. The highest level of beauty can bring tears to your eyes. So, we've talked about beauty, and now let's look at the flip side of that. The opposite of beauty is something called sublimity. We just said that the first thing people really got about art was beauty, but they soon started noticing this other thing, sublimity. Back in ancient Rome, there was this guy named Longinus, 1st century CE, who wrote a whole book called On the Sublime, just to talk about this idea. And in China, they also got onto the idea of sublimity pretty early, going way back to Mencius, 4th century BCE. In Mencius, there's this line that goes like this: "Fullness makes something beautiful, fullness with a shining brightness makes it great." Now, he didn't actually use the word sublimity, he said greatness instead. But this is probably the first time in Chinese art thinking that they really got what sublimity was about, fullness with a shining brightness. But even though Chinese art thinking, and all the talk about poetry and painting, has been around for ages, they haven't really gone into a lot of detail about sublimity. In the Qing dynasty, there were these poets from the Tongcheng School, and one of them, Yao Nai, 18th century CE, really laid it out about these two things: one is beauty, the other is sublimity. I've pulled a big chunk from his art philosophy, which he was talking about in a letter to a friend. We can flip to page 116 of my book and see how Yao Nai breaks down sublimity and compares it with beauty. In this letter to his friend, Yao Nai really went for it, comparing the beauty of manly stuff with the beauty of girly stuff, both of which he called beauty. One's all manly, the other's all girly. Yao, who knew his stuff about the ways of heaven and earth, talked about how yin and yang, manliness and femininity, all play into how writers do their thing. These writings are the real deal of heaven and earth, and the whole yin and yang, manly and girly thing has been passed down since the time of the old philosophers. But in the writings of these philosophers, it's probably not so clear-cut. Manly and girly, but in the writings after the old philosophers, there's a bit of a slant, either towards manly stuff or towards girly stuff. Those who really nail the beauty of manliness, their writings are like thunder, like lightning, like the wind rushing out of the valley, like towering mountains and steep cliffs, like the surging rivers, like galloping steeds. Their brilliance is like the bright sun, like fire, like gold and iron. In their dealings with people, they're like standing high and seeing far, like a ruler facing a crowd, like inspiring a bunch of warriors to battle. This is talking about the beauty of manliness, clearly pointing to sublimity. And for those who really get the beauty of girly stuff, what's their writing like? Like the birth of the early sun, like a gentle breeze, like clouds, like rosy haze, like secluded forests and winding streams, like ripples, like the brilliance of pearls and jade, like the cry of wild geese entering a vast expanse. This bit describes beauty and sublimity, and can be seen as the first really clear distinction between beauty and sublimity in the history of Chinese aesthetic thought. Alright, let's talk about what sublimity really means. So, first off, we need to think about the inner realm that makes sublimity possible. It's all about characteristics like being infinite, rugged, desolate, obscure, vast, having boundless power, being severe, and stirring. When we have these characteristics in our inner realm, it's like our imagination can make sublimity happen. Now, when it comes to creating the overall characteristics of sublime aesthetic imagery, it's all about making people feel a bit of awe, making them realize that their own strength is actually pretty small and insignificant. The thing is, the features of the object aren't about giving pleasure, they're more about causing pain, but somehow this kind of pain becomes a key part of the aesthetic imagery. But why is that? Well, we usually like things that are peaceful, harmonious, light, and lively. But this kind of aesthetic imagery that we see as sublime is the total opposite. It makes us feel awe, severity, ruggedness, and infinity, and it's hard for us to wrap our heads around it. When we feel like we have the freedom to understand and control things, we're at peace. But when we're faced with this huge, infinite image, it brings us awe, it's a painful feeling. Yet somehow, it can be transformed into sublimity, this kind of aesthetic imagery. Of course, the condition is that this scary object isn't actually threatening your life. For example, if you can't stand on the edge of a cliff, you can't experience the beauty of sublimity, it's just not possible, you feel like your life is in danger. At that moment, you're just plain scared, there's no room for sublime beauty. You've got to be in a safe zone, that's the first thing. This terrifying object, without actually threatening our lives, has the potential to awaken the power of our minds to go beyond just being biological creatures. When faced with this huge, endless, vast, rugged, and stirring natural force, people realize that the creatures around them are so small and weak. But in this feeling of smallness and weakness, there's a turnaround, and it becomes an appreciation of the sublime. I've never been to Tibet. People keep telling me that I should go, and that once I'm there, on the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, the roof of the world, I'll understand just how small and weak we humans are, how insignificant and inconsequential we are. In a modern city like Shanghai, we feel like humanity's power is really strong. But all those skyscrapers, elevated subways, they're all just things we've made. But when you're out in the endless natural desert, you feel your own infinite smallness as a living being. So my friends told me, you cannot imagine the residents there are non-religious, this is unimaginable. There is a sublime, transcendent world order that determines the fate of puny human beings, and the religious piety of the people there is explained by their natural environment. But I've always been too scared to go there. It's the altitude sickness, you know.